Greetings, Mark Goering, publisher of The Sun, and today my guest is, monthly guest is George Epstein, Sun columnist.
Good to see you.
How's it going?
It's great. Beautiful weather. All is good. Playing a lot of tennis.
Has this not been the best September weather ever?
Just perfect. You're absolutely right. But probably warmer than it's supposed to be.
Oh yeah, I know. And it's awful these days. Like when the weather's too good, you feel guilty.
Yeah.
Guilty. So George hasn't been here. You haven't been here since the primary. So we'll get through all that stuff. But let's talk about the environment. Speaking of the weather, what about it?
We're having a presidential campaign, and we have federal offices, and we have gubernatorial offices, and people are running left and right, and they're running ads. Nobody's talking about the environment. And you have Republicans like Trump and Sununu who just don't care. I mean, that's just not anything of interest to them, and they simply say what they need to say in order to try to gain a vote. Democrats say the stuff they're supposed to say. Gee, we love the environment. We're going to make it better, and don't do anything, and have no specific plans to do anything, and don't see it apparently as a big vote-winning measure. But the world's getting hotter. We just finished the hottest year on record, the hottest summer on record, and by on record they mean in the history of human beings on this planet. Not millions and millions of years ago, but in the history of human beings, it's the hottest it's ever been. And if you chart a graph with the amount of carbon in the atmosphere, it goes up like that since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. And if you chart the temperatures worldwide since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, it goes right up along that same pattern. And I'm enough of a statistician to know that correlation doesn't prove causation, but dumping millions and millions of tons worth of carbon into the atmosphere makes the Earth hotter. And we're not doing anything much about it. We're moving very, very slowly, and they're not talking about it. And I just think that in this period of time, these next couple of months, when literally billions of dollars will be spent to convince us to vote for one candidate or another candidate, that at least some candidates should be taking this seriously, should be talking about it, should be addressing it with specific proposals, specific actions that the country should be taking. And it bothers me that they're not. And you bring it back locally, and you have the whole, making a mess out of the Saco River and the planning process that Conway's engaged in. How many people is too many? What kinds of activities do we want to attract and add to, which are too much for our woods and our waterways and all the rest of it?
You've gone from the entire scope of humanity to the Saco River.
You got to.
In one 3-minute segment. That's pretty good, George.
Our audience wants it local as well as worldwide and international.
Okay, so a couple things about that. One is, do you think the body politic has changed in that even most Republicans believe in climate change? I do, and I'm no statistician, as you know, but it just seemed obvious of all the things that science can prove, that's an easy one. Like you can literally drill down on an iceberg in Antarctica and figure out the carbon content or whatever.
Right.
So do you think body politics has changed? And the other thing is that when you say we're not doing anything, it's not no pun intended, it's not a hot issue this time. But I mean, you talk to a conservative and the Democrats, President Biden, he's just throwing us under the bus because he's putting so much money into environmental. I mean, there's like $1 billion going to nuclear fusion plants. I mean, there's a lot of money out there.
Yeah. So you look at things. So first of all, the good news is that I do think Americans have very largely accepted the fact that we have a problem and that problem needs to be addressed. Different levels of priority, but I do think we're pretty far along, both Democrats and Republicans. The fact that the presidential candidates, our congressional candidates aren't talking about it at all, that's what I'm getting at, or we're not hearing anything, in part because I don't think they know what to do. A lot of the Democratic proposals and the progressive proposals, stopping pipelines, stopping drilling in this area or that area and so on, primarily affects and puts the burden of fixing this on rural areas. It places a much greater emphasis on trying to reduce the amount of gasoline used to travel. We have to drive a long way. People in Wyoming have to travel a really long way. People in New York City and Los Angeles and the places that vote Democratic, they don't have to drive very far. And so the burden to fix this and to deal with rising gasoline prices, rising heating oil prices. Who heats their home with oil anymore around this country? Not a lot of people, but we do around here. The burden falls on us. And so you have the Democrats don't really want to talk about it, at least in New Hampshire, because they're going to lose votes by talking about it, because they're going to raise the cost of us traveling, the cost of us heating our homes. So I think the failure of the political parties and the candidates to address the issue is what I'm trying to get at. It's not that there are no good ideas. We've talked a little bit about offshore wind is just a solution to New Hampshire. The North Sea, the wind blows all the time. Yeah, you would need some battery parks, but you're going to get very consistent electricity in massive amounts offshore from the little bit of shoreline that New Hampshire has. Maine's going down the road. New Hampshire hasn't done anything to make this happen. The solar deal that you get in New Hampshire doesn't really do a very good job of promoting solar usage in New Hampshire. We could have a lot more houses with roofs that are covered with panels, and as you do here at the sun, and that are reducing our dependence on primarily natural gas and nuclear power. Is nuclear power a solution? Let's talk about it. Let's have fully informed people standing up and saying, look, this is what's dangerous about it. This is what we've fixed, so it'll never be a 3-mile island again. There'll be no Chernobyl.
Well, they're going to have smaller nuclear.
Yeah, but smaller alone doesn't do it. It has to be a different technology, and there are differences in that technology. So let's have that discussion. We're not hearing anything. And if I were trying to appeal to younger voters who care more about this than people like us who are going to be dead anyway, I would be really making some noise about the environment and about trying to protect our environment. And not just carbon in the atmosphere, but hiking trails and streams and rivers and lakes and cyanobacteria blooms and all the rest of this stuff that it has affected people this summer.
I'm going to put on my two things. One is I'm going to put on for the people who think I'm a communist, which they do because they call us the Communist Daily Sun sometimes. I'm going to put my Ayn Rand hat on here.
Okay. And
I think what's going to happen is the market's going to decide. When enough people in Florida are underwater, or New York, or Bangladesh, I think that's going to, and it's starting now. I mean, that's going to just change people's minds and change people's mindset. And I think technology, we're right on the cusp, right? And we've talked about this before with population. Too many people. The problem is we get too many people, right? And that's going, in 50 years, it's going to start, the population of the world is going to start declining. And I think if we can get through this next 50 or 60 years as humanity, then technology will meet we'll supply the answers for that. Well, maybe we'll all be living in high rises like Star Wars, you know, and we're just going to have to preserve vast amounts of acreage, but I think that's going to happen. Number two is that when you talk about the Saco River, and I wrote a column last week about this new proposal by the planning board they want to restrict big buildings, or not big buildings, buildings 15,000 square feet to a very small part of the strip. Nobody commented except Steve Porter at the planning board meeting because he didn't like it. But really the only way you can do that, I mean, you know, here we are, we're trying to protect the strip, but meanwhile we're trying to build all this affordable housing. All to me is the other side of the balloon of bringing more people here, more demand on our resources and all that. I mean, do you think we should just stop development completely and say, we're good, we like it here?
We don't have time for that debate. Today's not the day for that debate. I want the debate to happen. And there is no debate happening on this topic. There's no meaningful, rich discussion occurring, certainly at the national level, certainly at our congressional level, state level. And you're right, there's some stuff going on locally, and I think going on locally around the state that's probably helpful that way. But I lean towards solutions being as local as possible, and state and federal rules telling us what to do and how to do it locally frequently don't fit the correct local needs, the real local needs. And let's try to find solutions that can come from the ground up as opposed to being imposed from Washington down but let's at least get the discussion going nationally. That's what I'm looking for.
All right, so let's switch gears here. The primary, we haven't talked since the primary. Any surprises in the primary? I think in your column before the primary, you said that it's possible that Cindy Warmington could win, and obviously she didn't.
Right.
So are there anything interesting in it?
No, I think probably the amount that Craig won by was a little more than I might have expected, but that was right in line with what was supposed to happen. Joe Kelly Levasseur, the rather wild man alderman down in Manchester, came closer, coming in a close third. I had indicated Prescott would win, Novoletsky would come in second, didn't even bother mentioning anyone else, but Levasseur was very close as a full-in Trump guy. He was the guy who went to the Republican Unity Breakfast after the polls and said, Ossipee, where's Ossipee? And this was a guy running in Ossipee to be nominated for Congress. So no, I don't think there were any particular surprises. I think the degree of nastiness in a primary was surprising to the point where you had John Lynch, who had endorsed Colin Van Ostern in the 2nd Congressional District, withdrawing his endorsement of Van Ostern and instead endorsing Maggie Goodlander because Van Ostern had been so negative in his attacks, and particularly attacks on Goodlander's abortion position. And Lynch said, this isn't right, you're not helping the Democratic Party, you're acting inappropriately. And so that's how nasty the primaries were. Certainly Morse and Ayotte went at each other very hard and very nasty. But I think it presages what's already started and what was happening even before the primaries were decided, and that is how vicious the advertising is right off the bat here in our statewide races.
You know, this is, and I'm going to ask you what do you think is going to happen with the November election statewide. But for people, there are a lot of people who, and you're very tuned into the state politics and understanding that. So I'm going to use Joe Kenney and Mark McConkey as 2 examples. Joe Kenney's our first district executive counselor, and Mark McConkey's running for Jeb Bradley's seat as our state senator. Both those guys are very conservative. So like Joe Kenney votes against Planned Parenthood. So I think, you know, a lot of people would vote against, don't like him because of that. On the other hand, and the same with Mark. I mean, they're both very conservative. On the other hand, those guys are local. I mean, Joe lives in Wakefield, wherever he lives, and Mark McConkey's down here in Ossipee world. But, you know, when there's something going on, they're up there on the rec trail walking it with somebody. And I just can't imagine Soldati, who's running against
Kenny.
What?
Kenny.
Kenny, thank you. Kenny, up here. You know, so I guess what I'm asking you is that how does a voter balance between, hey, there's Mark McConkey down here in Redstone looking at the monument with a screwed up median. We like that local connection, and we like Joe Kenney helping out with all this stuff versus more of their statewide policies and approaches.
Good question. And Soldati has a problem. He is not known up here. His name is largely unknown. I'd say a couple of things. One is Soldati as a name is extremely well known in the southern part of the district because Daddy was a prosecutor, a county attorney for a long time and stuff like that, ran for Congress. So he's part of a political family. So he's well known in the southern part of the district where there are more people. So that might be a little bit of an offset, but you're right.
But how do you balance that?
How do they balance it? I think the only thing you said that was wrong was describing McConkey and Kenney as being conservative. And they're maybe right wing, but they're not conservative. They're very state control oriented. They both have consistently voted for the state to be in control of things and to decide things and to take away authority from our town meetings and from our local communities. So they're very central government, and I would say big government oriented, even though their positions are to the right. So that, you know, there's
Can you give me an example?
Sure. So Kenney and his racetrack in Tamworth is a perfect example where he snuck through the approval for the racetrack, overcoming the ordinances in Tamworth around sound and around water protection and so on. They didn't have zoning, but there were other things that the town was holding stuff up. And he put on the consent agenda, when he was a state senator, he put on the consent agenda where there'd be no discussion, it would just zip through, and if no one saw it, and no one did. And so it zipped through, and all of a sudden we had a racetrack there. With regard to McConkey, I think, all you have to do is look at his history with the educational freedom accounts,
right.
And which is turning into quite the little scandal, I think. And the desire to take away from the voters control of schools and put it in the hands of Concord feeding money to private enterprise.
So those are conservative. I would argue those are conservative positions.
I would argue they're right wing, but not conservative. Conservative to me means small government. And when you bring authority to the state capital and take it away from local communities, I don't think that's conservative. I think that's big government, but right wing. So
okay.
I'll leave it there. So
okay.
yeah,
but how do you, okay. So do you have?
But how do you weigh those two things? And I think accessibility is important. So I could disagree with someone like Jeb Bradley on a whole array of different things. You could always give him a call. And he was very responsive. You could always have a conversation. You could discuss the issue with him. And I think he listened. Didn't always agree, but I think he listened. I think there should be a lot of value placed on that. And part of it is a function of the particular position you're running for. And so I do think that I want to be able to talk to my state senator. I'm probably less interested in talking to my executive counselor. That person is dealing with statewide issues. So it might affect me more in the Senate race and less in the executive council race that I have access to a particular office holder more frequently. But the reality is this is a presidential election year. And it's really hard for anybody else to get any attention during a presidential election year. Who's paying attention to a state Senate race? Who's paying attention to an executive council race? So the net impact, much like you said, is, gee, I know this Joe Kinney guy. I saw his picture in the paper standing by the medium. He's not going to do anything about it. He can't fix it. He doesn't probably really care that much, but he shows up. And so I'm going to cut him some slack, and maybe I'll vote for him because I don't know who this Soldati guy is. I think that's the shame of it, is that the presidential election takes all the air out of the sails of the voters, and the voters are so overwhelmed by that they don't pay a lot of attention to these other races.
I mean, and what do you think is going to happen in the November election in New Hampshire? I mean, my personal sense is that I think the Democrats nationally are going to do better than people predict. Saying now it's close everywhere. Harris is catching up and all that, but I think just by the numbers of so many women who are going to vote for Harris, so many young people, and we know the core Trump people are really high school educated white guys. I mean, that's his core group, and so I think the Dems are going to do surprisingly well. Right or wrong, who knows? So, but in New Hampshire, I think there's a chance that Ayotte could lose in this because of Trump.
I was just. Perfect. I think that's exactly right. She has the lead. She's generally liked. She was an okay senator, some quirks to her senatorial votes that she'll be criticized on. But Craig's not a home run hit either. The fact of the matter is that Manchester is not a good-looking city today and isn't a whole lot better off after her term in office as mayor than it was before she got there. So she has, in Manchester, many of the same problems that cities all over the country had: homelessness, opioid addiction, all that stuff is going on in Manchester, and she has to live with the outcome of that. So, so clearly Ayotte's the favorite, but does the presidential election or the presidential race so dominate everyone's thinking that the people in New Hampshire who will vote for Harris over Trump, almost certainly. Will Harris win by so much in New Hampshire that she'll drag Craig along and overcome the lead that Ayotte has? Excuse me. It's possible. Wouldn't be my bet. Ayotte's got awful lot of name recognition, and she's got mostly positives next to her name. Craig doesn't have a single positive that you can point at, other than she's a Democrat. She's on the same side of the fence as Harris instead of Trump. But what did she do in Manchester that's going to win her?
And we
vote?
have a history of having moderate, recent history of moderate, moderate Republican governors. I think, which is a balance to our federal delegation, which is all Democrats, and it's going to be all women.
Well, and that's the other part of it, is that New Hampshire hasn't been shy about splitting ballots and saying, boy, I'm going to vote for Republican for this position and Democrat for that one, which is not in Craig's best interest.
Speaking of that, Jeb Bradley was here just an hour ago in television time. It was 4 days ago, viewers now. He was here. So I asked him what the issues were, and one of them he said was immigration. And he went to the northern border, and I didn't debate that. And I know they found, my joke about the northern problem with immigration is sort of like someone gave me a whistle to keep polar bears away. I put on my bumper. I have not seen a polar, right? So, but he talked about sanctuary cities, pointing to Manchester. What do you know about sanctuary cities or sanctuary, whatever it's called? And is Manchester one of those?
You got to give the Republican Party a great deal of credit for just making up terms and making them evil. So there's no such thing as a sanctuary city. There's no category, there's no vote you take to declare that you're a sanctuary city or anything like that. But the fact of the matter is that police departments in cities have to make a decision about the degree to which they're going to cooperate with the federal government around immigration issues. And the logical thing, you say to yourself, gee, if I've got illegal immigrants in the state and one of them commits a crime and steals something, a Twinkie from a convenience store, I'm going to call up ICE and have this person carted away. I don't want to have to put them through my system. And so I don't want a sanctuary for those people. But what apparently state police and in particular city police departments are struggling with is the fact that they need the cooperation of their communities, the folks on the ground, the people who live in poorer areas in their cities.
How does
so Manchester gets this category because the police in Manchester don't want to turn people in who are illegal, but for example are serving as important witnesses in prosecutions. They don't want people afraid to report crimes because then they'll get carried away by ICE. They want the community to be part of the policing of their neighborhoods.
But how does Manchester get the immigrants and why doesn't North Conway?
Oh, I think that's a whole nother question, but I think that's an issue. It has nothing to do with sanctuary cities. That has to do with the two things, really, but mostly momentum. Once you start, you get 2, you're going to have 4, and you're going to have 8 because they know each other. People reach out to their family and friends who are crossing the border, and they say, yeah, I'm up here, I'm in Manchester, and they come there. And why did they go to Manchester in the first place? Why did they go to Lewiston, Maine in the first place? And there are a handful of places in northern New England. And it was largely because of charitable efforts by churches and other charitable groups.
The Somalians.
Yeah. And I think the cross-country running coach at Manchester high schools, they really want those Somalians to be there because they're really good cross-country runners. So I think you have a momentum aspect to it where it does get started and then it really builds upon itself. And how many of them are in the country legal? I don't know. My daughter teaching out in Portland, Oregon, the ultimate sanctuary city, if there is one, right? And she introduced me to a little girl, a 15-year-old girl, who came to the United States at the age of 6 months. Her mother had been raped in Guatemala, escaped, came to the United States illegally, and this kid grew up in the United States, didn't speak any real Spanish, knew some words, didn't speak any Spanish. And her mother had just been arrested at a raid at a food packing plant, which is where a lot of the people who are in the country illegally are working, keeping the price of our food down because they work cheap. And this kid couldn't go home, didn't really have a place to live, and I'm sitting there eating lunch with her in the high school cafeteria with my daughter sitting there, and I'm thinking, you know, what are we doing here? Are we going to round her up and send her back to Guatemala, where she hadn't been since she was 6 months old, and where, you know, at least her mother probably will be in danger if she is in fact returned there? Boy, we don't have a solution. You gotta stop people crossing the border in massive numbers. And and Harris and Biden utterly failed and ignored the problem for 3 years, and then decided it was a meaningful political issue, so now we'll pay some attention to it. I mean, it was outrageous, their performance. Trump didn't do anything particular. It wasn't until COVID came along that the courts allowed him to really shut things down and enforce and block people crossing the border, and Mexico helped, and the other countries helped. The movement of people was much slower during COVID. And so nobody's done anything since Reagan gave them all a free ride, you know, 30, 40 years ago, whatever it was.
They used to have a lottery system in Cuba. I met somebody, a Cuban, and you know, he was the lucky one that got the lottery. Anyway, you're on fire today, George. We're almost through.
I think so.
You're on fire. You're almost through. We got 3 minutes left, and I just wanted to get to local education again.
Okay.
So Bill Marvel wrote another column. I don't know if you saw it. And
Yeah.
our scores are comparatively even lower than other bad schools.
Yeah.
And you know, it just scuttlebutt. You know, in the newspaper business, you know, we say we don't print the truth. We just print what people tell us. You know, and so but one of the things.
Try.
No, I know. One of the things I heard and is that Carl Nelson. One of the things that he did, because he was a bricks and mortar guy, he changed the position of assistant superintendent from curriculum to basically being an assistant superintendent, not curriculum. And literally, the one person, the name that always comes back in the last 15 years that have paid attention to curriculum is Jack Loyne. That he's the one principal that put a lot of energy into it. Do you have any magic answers for what's going on, or is it just are we just no different than any other community?
Well,
in 2 minutes.
Your question suggests that the people matter, and that the right person in the right job makes a difference. And I couldn't agree with you more that the position of, quote, assistant superintendent, unquote, really needs to be someone with a curriculum focus, or someone who is a super duper administrator to allow the superintendent to devote her energies to curriculum. But there does have to be a central office, absolute devotion to it. But it's far too much for any one person, and I'm going to go back in history. So here's the old man on me. The people who made the difference academically in the Mount Washington Valley 50 years ago were the department heads at Kennett High School. Gordon Mann, Carl Seidenstucker, Ken Marshner in science, and
Fisher?
Bob Fisher in English. You had really smart people who were the department heads. They got one extra period off, and they got paid a couple of $1,000 to be a department head. And some of them, maybe not all of them, but some of them would get out in the elementary schools. They were all out in the middle school, the junior highs, not just in Conway, but in Bartlett and Tamworth as well, the 7th and 8th graders down there, working with the teachers, because elementary school teachers are generally lousy math teachers. They became elementary school teachers because they couldn't do math. I mean, that's an awful thing to say. I'm going to apologize to all, but that's
you can reach George. George,
yeah, right? But that's not completely untrue. No, and science is not one of the great strengths. And so having the leadership in those areas is really important. And you can't just have one person in a central office, because that person's not going to be an expert in English and writing and science and math. You want the subject area experts that you have, and the number one people should be department heads in our high school. And our Conway School Board, in its infinite wisdom, eliminated department heads. And
we don't have department heads?
I don't know that there's anything that is a department head, certainly not what it ever was. And so getting out there and talking to the real subject area experts, Kennett probably being the source of that. Maybe there's some experts at other levels. That's not unreasonable. But to have that coordination in each major subject area is an absolute necessity. We don't have that. We need that.
We have to do, as we call in the trade, a hard stop.
Okay.
We are done. George.
Hey.
Always a pleasure. Thank
Thanks.
you. And we'll see you next month.
You will.